Hello everyone and welcome back to your favourite Formula 1 show. Yes, Jamie and I return once again, this time out with episode 179 of Knowing Wheel. Of course, looking back over what ended up being quite a chaotic and entertaining Canadian Grand Prix. But of course, as always, Jamie, first of all, before we dive into it, how are you doing?
I'm good. The viewers all on YouTube at least will have noticed I was staring gormlessly to my left as you started because I was just checking my emails. So that's a good way to start. I just snapped back to the centre as soon as you began. You took me off guard, but we're here and we're ready to go, clearly.
I always like to surprise you. What has also been a bit of a surprise this week is we've ticked over 600 subs on the Knowing Wheel YouTube channel. We're up to 606. So if you are new or you just aren't already subscribed, please do. Because if we get to 1,000, then we can actually start monetizing this, which would be very, very useful to help with future developments of the Knowing Wheel empire.
Studio.
Exactly. That would basically just be the plan. We want to get a studio at some point down the line. But of course, yeah, it's always greatly appreciated, all the continued support inside this podcast. Of course, Jamie, you might remember actually, before I forget, last week we mentioned about the McLaren cheating scandal. We
did.
And of course,
the engine stuff, wasn't it?
That then went nowhere in the end.
Yeah. Classic.
So that's okay. The problem is
McLaren are not cheating.
Exactly, McLaren aren't cheating. The problem is obviously the TikTok of that clip obviously went out after it was confirmed that McLaren weren't doing anything illegal, and kind of banged.
Oh no! So everyone thinks we're now clowns. Fantastic.
It's got 82,000 views on TikTok.
And how many hate comments? That's the key
A lot.
stat.
Most of them, I would go as far as to say.
Well, I'm not surprised. It is pretty much false information, or at the time it wasn't. But
at the time it wasn't. It was correct. Yeah, exactly. That's the problem, of course, when we're right on the cusp of the cutting edge, aren't we? The bleeding edge of Formula One news, as we are. So
we usually do a good job of missing it. So that's not a problem. But
exactly.
One thing we did miss. One thing we did miss last week was a couple of contract announcements.
Yes.
Which happened before Canada, both in the Red Bull stable. Firstly, a 2-year extension for Checo Perez.
Yes.
Excuse me, what?
Why?
Yeah, I'm bemused by that, personally, because they know that Perez is best. He performs best when he's got pressure to win a seat or to extend the contract. And now they've just taken the pressure off him for the rest of this season, all of 2025, and most of 2026, realistically. So, for somebody who's, spoiler, not made Q3 since April, or whatever it is now, maybe the start of May just, then this is bemusing. I'm amazed at what they've done.
Well, have you heard, because Christian Horner accidentally confirmed a lot more information about this than any of us thought he would.
I haven't.
So, he's not on a 2-year deal. He's on a 1+1.
Interesting. So why has everyone said it's a 2-year then?
Because it was announced as a multi-year deal when it's a 1+1, which Christian Horner was very much, well, 1 add 1 is 2. Which you think, that's the cutting edge of Formula 1 knowledge, isn't it? But, interestingly, apparently, there is a clause in that contract that directly relates to the performance of the other driver who was announced. It was actually announced mid-weekend, wasn't it? Before qualifying, I believe. But Yuki Tsunoda, of course, has been confirmed that he has signed a 1-year extension with the Visa Cash App Racing Bulls team. So that's Liam Lawson not getting a seat in the future. But apparently,
Helmut Marko lied to us all.
Exactly.
I don't know why we're surprised.
No, we're not. But apparently, that there is a very much a close tie between those two contracts of you two can both be switched.
Yeah, and that makes sense, I think. And Red Bull have never been afraid to change drivers. Yeah. But the fact that Gasly and Albon got such little time because Red Bull weren't the fastest car at that point, and now they are the fastest car, they're kind of comfortable. They don't really need Perez to be scoring points.
Well, they're going to need to pretty soon.
Yeah, it's true. Although, I doubt Max will win the Constructors' Own this year, but he wouldn't be far off.
I think it's near impossible for him to win. I'm pretty certain it's almost mathematically impossible for him to win the constructors this year alone at this point, unless somehow Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin, and McLaren fail to score for the rest of the year.
Yeah, probably. But last year he would have won on his own. So, but then the car was much better. It's confusing to me that they've locked Perez down for so long when they've been on the record in saying that he works best under pressure. And now they've just gone against that. They don't want to
put pressure on him, apparently, which I can't work out why. Maybe they enjoy the clown show. I don't know.
Maybe they enjoy making Max look great because he's very good at doing that.
Well, this is what I was about to say. I wonder whether there's still a little bit of nervousness within that team of going, well, we'll keep Perez around because he knows how the organisation works if Max decides to bail, either going into or finishing 2026, if Red Bull aren't where they want to be. Potentially. And then, it does leave Carlos Sainz in a bit of mud, but we kind of knew that already because Red Bull was not on the table massively for him. But yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about that in a show down the line, hopefully. Unless it gets announced this week that it's going to Williams, but it might not. It probably won't. I think that announcement's coming pretty soon, especially with the weekend Logan Sargent ended up having. Let's get into the Grand Prix weekend then, Jamie. Of course, Friday all weekend I think was very, very entertaining, wasn't it, for the most part? Very, very entertaining and very, very damp throughout a lot of the weekend as well. Friday was just chaos, wasn't it, of trying to work out track conditions even.
Yeah, a lot of drivers didn't even bother setting times, or competitive times throughout the Friday practice sessions. But Verstappen, who did try and set some times, had a bit of an engine issue. And obviously it didn't massively matter for this weekend because they can just change the engine on Friday, but it will definitely have repercussions for the rest of the season because they couldn't recover that engine part which failed. So he will have to take engine pens at some point down the line. And to be honest, most drivers probably will. But his is nailed on that he will have to for sure. Yeah,
I think, and sometimes, to be honest, I don't think that's such a bad thing. Because it's better than going into a weekend, say, I don't know, towards the end of the year, Mexico, for example, and suddenly having a mechanical failure in free practice or something like that, and then being forced to take a penalty there. At least he can kind of plan when he'll do it. Likely Belgium, as you mentioned, actually in our notes, funnily enough. So he'll try and basically go from 15th to 1st in Belgium or something like that.
Third year in a row.
And kill all the hype as we go into the summer break. But yeah, obviously, I'd be staggered if anybody gets to the end of the year with no grid penalties through mechanical issues. Just because, obviously, I feel, obviously, again, because obviously Formula 1 wants to be more sustainable and that kind of thing, and, the days of throwing in 3 engines a weekend are well behind us. I think they always want to make sure that there is slightly not enough free allowance rather than slightly too much.
Yeah, and I quite like the current system, to be honest.
I don't think it works
the new 2026 regs got announced, but we won't go into that today because it's going to be a lot to
unpack. Exactly, yeah. That'll be, I think, next week probably. There'll be a lot to unpack there. But yeah, no, like I said, I'd rather, obviously, it's not that we get to Vegas and teams going, oh, well, we got a free engine we can still use, so we'll lob that in. There is an element of strategy to it, and of course, if you're in Red Bull's shoes where you've had one of those engines going up very early on in the year, that is going to be something you have to consider later on. I tell you who did look quick, though, throughout Friday, was Lewis Hamilton, wasn't it? Or Saturday morning.
More on Saturday morning, yeah. Alonso was fastest in both for Friday sessions, but it didn't really mean that much.
Was on Friday? I thought it was fastest in one.
So.
I thought Norris was fastest in the other.
Oh, potentially. Either way, on Saturday morning, the Mercedes looked very quick with their new front wing upgrade, which they confirmed was on the car for both cars this weekend. And yeah, going into quali, this is the only session of dry running before the quali, which looked to be dry with a little threat of rain potentially, but it was definitely going to start in the dry. So it boded well for both Mercedes, actually. Lewis Hamilton was the leader on practice in the morning. And yeah, were they back? Are they going to, dominate this like they used to 10 years ago? Who knew?
But, I saw a brilliant quote about this after qualifying, which obviously we'll get into in just a moment, and this should kind of precursor that session, but someone said watching Lewis Hamilton in 2024 is like spending all week with the expectation that you're going to sleep with Natalie Portman at the weekend, and then suddenly Danny DeVito shows up. It was so true.
I guess it was a disappointing qualifying session.
So much pain.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got to get our tin hats on in a minute, but obviously we'll get there.
What you do? I just think he's finished.
No, Jamie, there's far more to this story than that. Just you wait, sunshine. But yeah, I mean, obviously heading out into Q1, of course, the circuit was still drying up a bit, and of course Montreal as well, where it's a permanent track, but isn't used that much. It does take a lot of time to rubber back in as well, and I think there had been areas of it as well that had been resurfaced. So almost a bit like Monaco, wasn't it? The track evolution was very, very strong through Q1.
Yeah.
And just like Monaco, it was the only qualifying session Sergio Perez would be in.
Yes. Yeah, qualifying 16th was not a good look.
Easy top three. Easy top three.
But yes, this is obviously Imola. He was P11.
Yep.
Monaco P out. I can't remember where. Q1.
I think it was 17th.
And then 16th here. He's not been in Q3 since Miami.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was at the very beginning of May, wasn't it? And it's now mid-June. So, yeah, we said after that one in Imola, could it be happening again, like last year, where he went 6 in a row with no Q3s? And we're halfway to that already.
Yeah, it's so alarming, isn't it? How it keeps happening. And, like we said, because we even spoke about this early on in the year, of course, when the first rumours came out about Checo re-signing. I think it was after Shanghai, wasn't it? Going, it's only a matter of time before he starts bottling it again. And we kind of said that in tongue-in-cheek because, I know you're not a Checo fan, and to be honest, I'm not really anymore ever since he went to Red Bull. But it would be nice to see him performing sometimes, surely.
Yeah, he's just a bit embarrassing in that Red Bull at the minute. It's like, genuinely, would any other driver be doing any worse?
Logan Sargent would.
But then Perez is qualifying in Q1 and crashing every race, basically. At the minute.
Yeah,
so,
it's true. I mean, it's a great stat for you, obviously, but it's going to be a spoiler.
We read it out last week.
Perez has scored 4 points in the last 4 Grand Prix.
That is madness. Wow. And then the other one is, we said it after Monaco, but Albon against Sargent was 30-0. It's now 31-0 or whatever it is. I can't remember the exact number against Sargent. Perez is 24-6 against Sargent.
It's so stupid.
Sargent hasn't never out-qualified his teammate, but he has out-qualified Checo Perez
6 times. He's got a 20% chance of out-qualifying Sergio Perez, which is madness.
In a Red Bull.
In a Red Bull against a Williams that this year is weaker than it was last year as well. Obviously Perez ended up out in Q1. Sargent didn't, though. We'll give him some credit there. He actually had a decent run through qualifying. But of course, he was joined by Valtteri Bottas, Esteban Ocon, and Jamie's favourite drivers in the world, Nico Hulkenberg and Zhou Guanyu. What do you make of that?
I was not happy in Q1. There didn't even seem to be a reason. They were just both slow. I think Zhou's crashed in qualifying. He crashed in practice as well, so he didn't actually have any dry laps before Q1. I believe he crashed
twice in practice, Jamie.
Not in the same practice session.
No, I believe he stacked it in FP1 and FP3,
though. Stacking is harsh on both those crashes. They weren't massive, but yes. I don't know what happened to Hulkenberg. He was just slow, so that's peak. He didn't really give a reason.
Last year. The second slowest this year.
Yeah, not the best. But Q2 came around, and again we had some front runners in a bit of jeopardy at the end of the session with threat of rain in the air. But it was probably the track was at its best during Q2. You once again had the Mercedes leading the way. Russell was fastest from Hamilton in second in Q2. And Max Verstappen was chilling in 15th as he was coming round his last lap. And watching live, I totally thought he'd ruined himself going through that last chicane. He missed the first apex by a bit and had to gather up the back end. And coming across the line, I was like, this is going to be out, it's over. And then, thankfully, it wasn't. But it was only like P8 or something, wasn't it? So, yeah, he had the composure just to get through the Q2 session. Sadly, Carlos Sainz tried to do the same thing, but couldn't collect it in the last chicane, and was out for a moment, sparing his teammate, who was P10 at the time, until Alex Albon comes along and knocks out Charles Leclerc as well. So we had Monaco's race winner and third place finisher qualified P11 and P12 in a car that never really looked comfortable all weekend in either of their drivers' hands.
It's so bizarre, because I mean, we were kind of living on a little bit of hope here. We were hyping up the idea that Ferrari this year might now actually be a title threat, but it feels like, if Mercedes have basically spent all year having bad weekends. Montreal was kind of their first good weekend, but even when they have a bad weekend, normally they're kind of like 8th and 9th and 10th, sort of around.
They respectably run as an operation.
Exactly. Yeah. When Ferrari have a bad weekend, they end up both out in Q2, and then can't even beat a lot of the cars that they should have out-qualified. They just end up stuck there, don't they? It's really odd. Whether it was they just set up completely the wrong direction, whether it was just they could not figure out what the track was doing, but they not at a single point all weekend did either Ferrari driver look confident. And of course, for Leclerc, yes, it's annoying. Don't matter too much. For a Carlos Sainz that is desperate to prove himself to any team still at the moment, no, I don't think it'll have a big impact at the end of the day. But it's not ideal, is it?
No. And to kind of be done in, especially Leclerc, who got sent out on used tyres in the last run, and therefore didn't really improve. That was madness, because everyone else was throwing tyres at that session like crazy. Even the Red Bull, the one Red Bull, who was still at this point. Everyone was using up their new tyres.
Max tried it and then realised it wouldn't work, didn't he?
Yeah. Whereas Ferrari tried it in the first runs and then tried it again in the second runs, with Leclerc at least. So, yeah, it was a bit mad. And that left them both out, along with Logan Sargent, who actually had one of his better qualifying sessions of his career in P13, with Magnussen and Gasly also out 14th and 15th before Q3. And the threat of rain was really in the air at this point.
Yes, yeah, it was, certainly. Obviously, everyone had kind of been speculating, because it was Montreal's one of those brilliant circuits, one of those brilliant areas, where all weekend it was like rain can just kind of appear anywhere. So it was kind of like, is it going to show up on the track at some point randomly? Could we be in for a Shanghai 2.0 where everyone's trying to judge? Or even Montreal last year, wasn't it? I remember George Russell. Or was it last year, or was it the year before? Russell tried to gamble it on a set of dries and span it turn 2 on his last ditch run. Either way,
it was wet
Montreal
too
was
last year, because Hulk qualified second.
He did, so. Yeah. I think it was last year, wasn't it? Russell tried it. But no one could match almost a bit like Miami, wasn't it, in the end? No one can match the time they did in Q2. But unlike Miami, it wasn't Verstappen on pole, because Russell and Mercedes managed to make it happen.
Somehow, on the used tyres in the first runs, he set a 12.0 to the 1,000, and
perfect.
Max Verstappen was equal to the 1,000th on his new tyres on the second run. Russell then didn't improve, and Norris, for good measure, put it 21 thousandths behind, which is insanity that you have three cars separated by plus 0.021.
Well, how many times this year is Norris going to lose out on pole by less than a tenth?
Yeah, you could probably combine all of his margins and be under half a second.
Exactly. Well, Jamie, you actually bring us quite quickly onto our quiz, which we're gonna shoehorn in quite early into this week's show, a bit like we did last week. So you mentioned there top 3 covered by just 21 thousandths of a second. I can't say this with 100% certainty.
Great, that's always a good start.
No, but I'm pretty certain it's the second ever closest top 3 in qualifying.
Okay.
Can you name
97?
me the first? Well done. That leads you nicely on
all over
quiz.
social media this week.
Exactly. Obviously, Jacques Villeneuve, Heinz-Harald Frentzen and Michael Schumacher all set an identical qualifying time. And what was that qualifying time, Jamie? Can you remember?
What was it?
Yep.
I've no idea. It was like a 14 something.
0.072.
Why would I know that?
As well, Damon Hill was only half a tenth off in that session.
Wow.
But your quiz today, Jamie, is pretty simple. I need you to give me... Obviously, there were only 6 point scorers back then. But give me all 6 of those point scorers, starting from the race winner.
I'm
if you get
not
going to
get this right at all.
It's over.
Neither of us were born in 1997.
I still know most of the result.
I know I can do the top 3, and after that I'm guessing.
Okay.
So first place was Mika Hakkinen.
It was very first ever win.
For McLaren. It was a McLaren 1-2 with my quiz nemesis, David Coulthard.
That was one of the other reasons I threw it in.
Yeah. Third place was Jacques Villeneuve, who won the championship after Schumacher attempted to take him out and failed.
Fun fact, we both scored as many points as Michael Schumacher did in 1997, despite the fact neither of us
Despite not being born. Then this is guesswork. So...
Well, it's quite famous because, obviously, the guy that finished 4th overtook Jacques and then let him back through again.
Oh.
Because he didn't... he thought he was going
Because
to
he wanted to get him on the podium.
Wasn't it... Yeah.
Well, they must be dislike Michael Schumacher then. So was it Damon Hill?
No.
Well, that's it over. Great. Was it Frentzen?
No, he was 6th in the end.
Was it Alesi?
You have named... Alesi was his teammate.
Alesi drove for Ferrari? No.
Not at that point,
Schumacher. Schumacher and whoever else was his teammate. Who even was the other Ferrari driver in that year?
Eddie Irvine.
I have no idea. Oh, yeah, of course. Alesi drove for Benetton.
Yes. This is so painful, but so funny.
So, the other Benetton... Was it Jarno Trulli?
No. I'm going to put you out your misery. This is too painful.
I have no idea.
Jarno Trulli was on the Formula 1 grid.
I don't think he was.
Wasn't. No. I think Jarno Trulli came in 98 or 99, wasn't it, in the end? It was Gerhard Berger.
Gerhard Berger, oh dear.
Gerhard Berger, dearie me.
Yeah, so I might not.
Coulthard, Villeneuve, Berger, Irvine, and Hightower Frentzen were the 6 you were looking for.
I was never going to get anything beyond the podium there, I'll be honest.
Fair enough.
But good quiz.
Thank you. I thought that was a proper eggy one, like you often do.
That was terrible. That was. I know what you feel like every week.
No, but it does also mean obviously we can segue back to Canada because of course the man that won the 1997 World Championship from this race decided he was going to talk smack of Daniel Ricciardo, didn't he?
Yeah, he loves to talk smack about any opportunity he could get.
Pretty much anything he can.
But Ricciardo qualified 5th ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in an RB that looked pretty on it, and only 2/10 from pole. Ahead of the likes of Lewis Hamilton, who qualified 7th in the car that was on pole position.
Well,
so
Jamie,
do you want to talk to us about that?
Tinfoil hat time. It's tinfoil hat time because Friday night, Hamilton did a little-known interview where basically said, I felt quick all day. I got the pace over everybody. But for some reason, every time I go into Q3, I lose 2/10.
I think everyone lost 2/10 in Q3 this time.
No, 2/10 relative to other drivers.
Right. Okay.
And he then confirmed after qualifying.
Good proof of that.
Yep. He's pretty much always reliably 2/10 slower than George, was basically what he meant. After qualifying, he then confirmed to the media that somehow, on every run he did, his tyres were 4 degrees colder than they should have been when they came out the blankets. Which, bearing in mind, they've got a lot of very good tech in keeping those tyres up to temp. That might happen once or twice here or there. Because, of course, he gets the dash readings.
I guess you see the telemetry afterwards and the dash readings. Well, stop crying, man. Get back on the track is what I'd say to that.
Fair enough. I mean, again, it is tinfoil.
He's bad.
Isn't it?
P7.
But there is a growing belief. Don't get me wrong. I think George Russell obviously is a very good driver and a very good qualifier. But there is definitely
8-1.
some kind of speculation as to maybe Hamilton, of course, out of a job. Well, not out of a job, but you know what I mean. Out of that team next year. It certainly doesn't take anything away from Mercedes to try and make George look better, does it?
No, it doesn't. But then I don't think they'd be tying a hand behind their back
You'd
when they're in a
hope not.
championship fight.
You would certainly hope not. And I think, it has been a lot this year. Hamilton hasn't been up to pace. But this was the first time I sort of looked down and went, hang on a minute, no, he's been on it all weekend. And suddenly you get into qualifying. Because you've got to admit, if just looking at FP3 and the results there, surely this was going to be pole 105. A track Lewis loves, in conditions that it was similar conditions to Hungary last year where he took pole, where no one knows what the track's like. There was definitely a strong
Russell
belief.
always had the edge once he got into qualifying.
Yeah.
I think after the first runs, wasn't it like a 1-3 or 1-4 after the first runs, and Hamilton didn't get together on second runs, so that you're going to end up seventh.
Let's be fair as well, Albon gave George a slipstream, which did help.
Yeah, George did get a slipstream.
I think had George not won, if George hadn't had the slipstream, Max would have taken pole. But I think
obviously.
that certainly meant that he had a bigger advantage over Lewis as well. At the end of the day, let's put our tinfoil hats back down, Jamie, because it's time for the Canadian Grand Prix, and it was raining all morning in Montreal. It had all but stopped raining, as we kind of had. Did you say you didn't watch it properly? Did you? They did a fantastic.
Well, I watched it on
interview.
Channel 4, so I watched it for the first time.
Brundle did
live.
a fantastic interview with a lady. Unfortunately, I'm blanking on her name.
I saw that.
It's really annoying.
I saw that.
That's the kind of people you want on the grid, bless her. She's a legend. Absolute legend. Loved that.
Yeah, that was very cool. Although she didn't know what a Grand Prix was.
I think she's deaf, which was probably what that was, Jake.
Probably didn't help very much. But it made me laugh. It was like, is this your first time on a Grand Prix? And she was like, no, I was here before. I then said, I met this name. I don't know who it was.
Jim Clark.
It wasn't Jim Clark.
It was Jim Clark at Riverside, she said, which was a Grand Prix.
It definitely wasn't Jim Clark. I'm going to find this afterwards.
Fair enough.
But it made me think she was just naming like a NASCAR driver and got confused or something. But maybe that's me misreading the situation.
Like Dick Trickle or something. Famous NASCAR driver.
It could have been nicer. It could have been like Jimmy Clark or something. It definitely.
She
didn't say
Clark. She definitely said Jimmy Clark.
Okay, well, there you go. I'm rinsing on an old lady for no reason.
Exactly.
Apologies.
If you've got a problem with that old lady, even though annoyingly I can't remember her name, then I've got a problem with you.
So disrespectful, not remembering her name there.
Exactly. But yeah, rain was rumoured pretty much immediately as the Grand Prix got going. So there was kind of an element of, can they make sure we get this race going before the rain arrives? Because then they're much less likely to red flag it. And everyone was on intermediates, with the exception of Haas.
Indeed, they went for the gamble. They went double up on the full wet, which could have, in hindsight, it worked for about 10 laps.
Less than
so
that.
It was very, very wet at the beginning. Great. So the Haas obviously started 13th and 16th
and 17th, wasn't it? I think 14th and 18th, wasn't it, in the end?
No, because he gained a place for Bottas too, so it was 17th.
Ah, yes.
Because the Saubers were in the pits. But yeah, they gained a lot of places, both of them, especially Magnussen, who was the leader. Got up to P4 ahead of Piastri.
Yeah.
And then by the time he was in fourth, the track had begun to swing back towards the Inters, which was always going to happen. So it was a worthwhile gamble, I think, but I don't think it paid off. But it was a lot of fun.
It did for K-Mag, because even by the time obviously he pit and came back out, he was still 13th. So he had actually gained from it, and that included the fact that Haas absolutely
really
destroyed his pit stop as well, which annoyed me. I think that was he made the call, not the team. So they were kind of left
probably.
a bit confused.
He just said, "I'm in the pits." When he's coming down the pit lane.
Which, to be fair, that could have very easily been, sort of still on the cut. I mean, at the end of the day, Haas didn't have the pace for points, as proven by the final result. But that very easily could have been, kind of fighting it out for longer than they did throughout.
Yeah, and they did this back in Hungary 2020, if I remember rightly, where Magnussen and Grosjean both started on a different tyre, and Magnussen ran third at the beginning and eventually got a point out of it when they were like a really, really backmarker car that year.
Yes.
So these kind of things can work.
Yeah, exactly. And I like the fact obviously Haas still, generally speaking, seem willing to roll the dice on this kind of thing, don't they?
And it was a lot of fun. He made a bunch of mistakes, and
exactly.
he must have felt great doing it. But
the sponsors will love it. Put it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
By
the time the track dried, they both had to pit. Obviously, everyone else is back on their inters that they started on. The Hasses have just pit for their own intermediates as well. And then, you've got this front three of Russell, Verstappen and Norris as they started. And then, all of a sudden, Lando Norris just turns on the pace. And within 2 laps, he's jumped both of them.
Well, we saw it just like we did at Imola, didn't we, really? McLaren are far better. It seems to be one of the things that Red Bull and Mercedes struggle more than most, and McLaren are the best on the grid of being able to heat up the core of the tyre without overheating the surface. And that's why they were so good and why they were able to look after the tyres better than anyone else, because they both had the confidence still, but without destroying the tyres like we saw Lando and George and Max do even.
Yeah, so lap 20, you had Lando jumped Verstappen at the final chicane. DRS was enabled at this point, despite being on intermediate still. And 1 lap later, he did the exact same to Russell, who, after driving very well for 20 laps, 21 laps, got passed by Norris for the lead, and then immediately, in trying to take the line for the last chicane, had to jump it, and the loss of momentum let Verstappen through too. So that's a bit of a bottle job, number 1 for George Russell of this race. And you've then got Norris leading from Verstappen and Russell, and then Norris just checked out. He was well clear after a couple more laps, and his pace was incredible on these old intermediates compared to his competitors. He had a 10-second lead by the time that, guess what, Logan Sargent did an unforced error and crashed.
I mean, I was watching early on, because I know I was talking to my dad about it when we watched the Grand Prix, and I was like, for Haas, you may as well just obviously stay out there a little bit longer on the full wet tyres, because someone is going to stack it, and that someone is going to be Logan Sargent. He made it further than I expected him to be fair. I thought he was going to drop it before lap 10, but it seems like at the moment, doesn't it, that Sargent has absolutely filled the... It seems to either weirdly be Sargent or, dare I say it, often actually Carlos Sainz, which of course he would make that mistake later on. But it just seems to be, that Sargent, if anyone's going to have an unforced error when the circuit isn't bone dry, it's normally going to be the Williams, isn't it? And
yes,
Williams are running out of patience.
And parts.
Parts, yeah. That's the other big one.
Yeah, James Vowles came out and said that Carlos Sainz's number 1 target, didn't he, at pre-weekend? So they've pretty much admitted that Logan Sargent isn't going to be in the seat if they can help it next season.
If they can help it, it's their seat. I'm sure they can decide.
Yeah, but they can knock on everyone's door and be like, "Do you want to drive for us?" And everyone says no. They probably stick with Sargent.
Yeah,
but
I get Antonelli.
Yeah, he'll be at Mercedes. So
show Guan Yu can drive.
Yeah, true. Get Joe in. That hopium's gone. He's not getting a seat next year.
Are you saying that now? Have you finally accepted that Zhou Guan Yu's going to be off next year?
I think I'd be very surprised. But then I was quite surprised last year as well when he got his contract extended. So I'm here for it.
Fair enough. But yeah, obviously Sargent crashing brought out the safety car because he stacked it just out of the first chicane. So turn 4, turn 5, or turn 3, turn 4.
Exit, wasn't it? Yeah.
And unfortunately, of course, we saw in Miami that Lando Norris was absolutely saved by the safety car. This weekend, karma kind of, there was balance restored in the world, wasn't it? Because it screwed over Norris and basically gave Max the lead, despite the fact Max hadn't made really a legitimate overtake all afternoon.
I mean,
that's not me trying to hate on Max, but that is just what happened, wasn't it, really?
It was unfortunate for Norris, but what goes around comes around. He did get gifted in Miami, and this was the exact opposite of what happened in Miami. So, you can't complain too badly. I actually think he could have been screwed a lot worse. Had obviously he caught the safety car and everyone else has pitted and is driving at the normal delta. So by the time that Norris pits, he's been going at safety car pace, which is slower than safety car delta pace.
Yes. Yeah.
So he came back out behind those top 2 and almost behind Piastri and a lot of them behind as well. I think Hamilton wasn't far away, was he? So yeah.
No, Hamilton was still stuck behind Alonso at this point.
Oh, Alonso was 5th at this point, wasn't he? So it was just Piastri who was racing. It was unfortunate for Norris, but I thought at this point that if he had that much pace just before the safety car. Surely he's just going to tear through them again. But I guess you've got to wait 20 laps until the tyre difference makes a difference.
Exactly. Or what he could do is what Charles Leclerc did in Ferrari, because of course their bad weekend got even worse, hadn't it? They'd already confirmed they had engine issues pretty much as soon as the race got underway. So he was losing half a second a lap on the straights, which is pretty painful. And then they boxed him to try and reset the car, but they didn't know if they were going to be able to reset the car, so they took a gamble and put him on hards, which by the time the safety car came in and it started to rain, basically meant his afternoon was ruined. But it was hilarious watching the Delta.
It was, because it was going up seconds every time it updated. And it spat a little bit more rain out during the safety car, so the Inters was definitely the right tyre to be on. And it was obvious. It wasn't like one of these borderline ones where it's like, it could have worked. No, it was never going to work.
No.
And yeah, I think you say it's a roll of the dice, but it's like, why would the hards be any better?
Exactly, it's a roll of the dice, but you're trying to roll a 7 with one dice. Is what Ferrari did there.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
It's the only way I can think about it.
Yeah, it was never possibly going to work. So, yeah, a couple laps later, he just gave up and retired. And I don't blame him, personally. But, I'm not sure they gave a reason.
Yeah, if you're meant to be the champion, mathematically so far, the championship threat this year, and you think, I did give him the kiss of death, didn't I? The fact that obviously he hasn't finished lower than P4 all season so far. I don't get how Ferrari cocked up this weekend as badly as they did. How on earth can you expect to even try and fight Max just purely on being a consistency, being a more consistent team, if you then get to a track like Canada and suddenly, because there's a spit of rain, you forget how to set up the car? It's so confusing.
Operate as a team as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's so bizarre. I mean, it'll be Lando Norris that ends up being, I would have thought, the title threat this year, but I'm sure by saying that now, Lando's going to retire for the next weekend.
Lando DNF confirmed in Barcelona.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, it's just so weird, isn't it? Kind of the way it all
the race settled down a little bit. Afterwards, you kind of had Max leading from Russell and Norris, and yeah, there wasn't too much action at the front. Piastri was still hanging with them in fourth as well, and you still had Hamilton beefing Alonso until eventually he got past. I can't remember exactly how.
Alonso locked up.
Interesting. Well, there you go. Hamilton clear.
Exactly. I've always said it. 2007 proved it.
Yeah, and to be fair to Hamilton, as soon as he got past Alonso, he was flying. And he maybe helped by the safety car later on, but he came right back into contention. But at this point, just the top four. And then the midfield was just so similarly paced that nobody was really making many moves, because there was kind of one intermediate line and the rest of the track was still soaking. So if you try and make a pass, you were having to go on the wet stuff, which as a fan I don't hate, because it makes it,
it's high risk, high reward,
the driver. Yeah, it tests the drivers a lot more and makes overtaking difficult, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'll whisper it, but yeah, I didn't mind it personally. That's the police trying to lock me up for that bad take.
Yep.
Yeah, but eventually you got one midfielder making a couple of moves, which was ridiculously good. Alex Albon was running P11 and was side by side around the outside of the chicane with Daniel Ricciardo, overtook him on the brakes while simultaneously going down the inside of Esteban Ocon, who was on old Inters from the start. I was amazed that there wasn't, firstly, contact, and neither car actually had to go off the track either.
I'm calling it now. That is going to take a huge effort to beat that for overtake of the year. And I'm going to say as well, because I'm still annoyed about that last year, is that if Fernando Alonso had done that, the Spaniards would throw him a parade.
There'd be a party still going on in Madrid.
Exactly.
And
we
Barcelona.
would see that on our timelines on Twitter for the next 6 months if Fernando Alonso did that. But no, that was genuinely a quality move, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Not necessarily on purpose. But
I'm not sure it was on purpose.
I'm sure he
he
went into that corner on the brakes just absolutely swearing to himself. Because he basically overtook Ocon. It was either, I'm overtaking him or I'm crashing into him. But it was beautiful. And I'm sure I never saw any interviews with Alex afterwards, because of course it amounted to nothing. But I'm sure if he played it off as he meant to do it, then fair play to him. I would have liked to have believed him. But as we obviously stepped over half distance, things were starting to calm down, weren't they? Obviously, there was meant to be no more threats of rain. So, of course, everyone then kind of was looking at each other. And by lap 45, every driver, with the exception of the top 3, had called it into the pit lane, obviously, to make the switch over to dry tyres. But just obviously by the virtue of the battling and kind of finding out, because obviously none of the top drivers wanted to gamble it without getting data off other drivers further back. Finally, Max and George decided to pit at the same time, and Lando Norris stayed out for an extra 2 laps, which was almost looking like the strategy call of the year, again, playing into McLaren's ability to keep the core temperatures nice and high. Yeah,
it's very good, and the track was, I think Gasly was the first to gamble, wasn't he, on the dries? But
yes, yeah.
Eventually you had, the problem was the outlap. We often see it in F2 actually with the tyre temperature, but the outlap on the dries was generally about 2 seconds or 3 seconds slower than driving on the inters.
And the
basically
wet
why
pit
you were
exit.
getting, and the wet pit exit really didn't help at all. But the more, obviously, as you get the tyres up to temperature, you then at least match the interpace. So it made sense actually for Norris to stay out those extra laps, because he was third anyway. The threat from behind was like Piastri and Hamilton had pit at this point and weren't closing in massively on the dries, so he knew he had a time in hand against them. And you almost might as well go, this is a roll of the dice that is worth going for in staying out, because if you just match what the other two do, you're going to still be third. So yeah, it was a good gamble. I did wonder if it was 2 laps was one too long, if the sweet spot was that 1 extra lap, but obviously hindsight's 2020. So yeah, it seemed to, it worked a bit, didn't it? It got him ahead of Russell, and he was briefly ahead of Verstappen. But then the wet pit exit had him almost spinning and crashing. So yeah, Verstappen got back the lead, and Norris had to settle for second at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And you've hit the nail on the head there. I think, obviously, again, hindsight is a beautiful thing. But had he just come in 1 lap after Max and George, because again, the big thing, of course, was you've just got to get back on the dry line. And I think if he'd come in 1 lap after them, it would have probably been, because they would have struggled so much to get their tyres up, he could have probably got out and onto that dry line and just parked in the way of Max and basically held him up. But the problem was, of course, because he went 2 laps longer, Max then had an opportunity to build up confidence in the car, build up those temperatures. So obviously by the time Lando came out, Max already knew what he was having to do anyway. And obviously Lando didn't yet. So I think had he come in 1 lap earlier, that could have completely changed the trajectory of the race. And, I mean, it has got me kind of thinking now with Lando. He's broken that duct of first win. He desperately, I think if he wants to have any real belief at a title charge this year, he desperately needs to chalk up another one. Prove that Miami wasn't a fluke. Get another one on the board, and then you're in business.
And he could have easily won this race reasonably.
Yes, yeah.
The early safety car he was going to win. If it was a normal race from there on, he was winning, for sure, in my mind. So, yeah, he was unlucky, but it's hard to see a world where he doesn't win another race this season.
I'd be staggered if he didn't, put it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, but you say that, of course, had things ran normally. Of course, he did then make a little mistake a couple laps later. He locked up down at the hairpin, let George Russell by. And then George Russell, for those of you keeping tabs or maybe having a shot every time he bottled it, take another one. Because immediately 2 laps later, he would just hand Lando back the position. And of course, all this was doing was just giving Max more breathing room at the front of the field.
More breathing space. He wasn't driving particularly well. He was just driving, and everyone else was messing up.
It was one of those horrible races, wasn't it? Horrible's the wrong word, but kind of...
Maybe for
Max
you,
was
horrible.
Not really the quickest driver at any point.
No.
But annoyingly, he was probably the only one that never really made an error. I think Lewis didn't either, but of course he was just kind of a bit more stuck behind Fernando for the first half of the Grand Prix. And also Piastri was just a bit slower. Exactly, Max at the end of the day didn't make a mistake, and he was one of those Grand Prix where not making a mistake was going to win you it. The same couldn't be said for his teammate.
No. No, that down at Sebastian Vettel's famous bottle job corner, Perez did the exact same thing, but a slightly worse, as he didn't catch it. But what I love about this style of Grand Prix, where you have one dry line, in most parts. And if you even go 3 centimeters over that white line, over the dry line, you are done. It just really separates the men from the boys in terms of the drivers, I think. And generally, Sergio Perez is one of the boys in this, and not in a good way. That it always seems to him the one to stick a wheel over that wet patch and spin out, and that's exactly what happened. And have you seen the Red Bull have been fined today for telling him to bring it back to the pits?
Yes.
Because he had a broken rear wing, which was flapping all over the place. He could have gone anywhere.
Well, he did leave a bit of debris around the circuit.
Yeah. They didn't want to call the safety car because of his teammate winning the race.
Yeah.
So they told him to bring the car back in a dangerous condition, and therefore he's now got a grid penalty, which means he'll probably start last if his Q1 streak carries on in the next race, and Red Bull got a fairly substantial fine, although obviously
fairly substantial.
Really 25k was it?
25,000 euros. Red Bull as a business probably make more than that in about 8 seconds, I would have thought.
Max gets paid that at least every second, probably. So very
I reckon they should have given both drivers a 10-second post-race penalty for race fixing. Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. That seems reasonable.
It does. But
they managed to avoid a safety car for that one lap.
They did.
And then the next lap, Carlos Sainz did it for them.
Yep. I mean, this one, obviously, Sainz drops it just like Perez did, but actually keeps it nearer the road. But I felt so sorry for Alex Albon here. I feel Sainz got away far too lightly with this incident, because that was the fact he lit up the rear wheels as he was spinning was what took Alex Albon out of the Grand Prix. And if I was Albon and Williams, I would be sending an invoice over to Ferrari this morning, first thing, about that crash damage. And the fact that, it kind of was immediately, it's a racing incident, and, no one's really spoke about it since then. That doesn't sit right with me, because that was a really... Not that the mistake was a rookie error by Sainz, but the fact that then he span into the middle of the track and left Albon with nowhere to go.
I would like to see an onboard of Sainz again, because I don't know if he did much wrong personally.
He did light up. He lit up the rear wheels as he went for the spin.
Probably to try and just keep it going, but you can't do that when his car's right behind you. It's like when Grosjean did it at the start in Spain, wasn't it?
Exactly the same.
18.
19, wasn't it? Rich Energy.
No, it was 20. It was 2018 because he took out Hulk and Gasly in the Renault in the.
Yes, he did, didn't he? Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, bad memories. Yeah, so you can't really do that kind of thing when his car's in a train behind you. Albon had nowhere to go. Felt really bad for him, but we've all been there in league racing when someone spins in front of you. Looking at Alex Bentham in Japan F2. And that took out both of us, actually. It still annoys me.
Clearly.
We were both taken out by that, and then we had a terrible race.
It.
Yeah, well, I won the sprint because of that takeout.
Do you remember this?
I didn't win very much.
Years ago.
I didn't win very much, so I got to take what I can get.
Fair enough. I don't blame you. But yeah, obviously that then brought out a second safety car. Staggeringly, yeah, only 2 safety cars in this race. And Mercedes decided to put, with less than 20 laps to go, put Hamilton on a set of hard compound tyres.
I didn't get that at all.
I meant to have put my tinfoil hat away.
I wonder if they had no mediums left, but they barely used any tyres all weekend, so surely
exactly
they still had some.
And even then, you take a punt and you put them on softs.
It was maybe Hamilton. He's a bit funny with tyres sometimes, isn't he? So maybe he just liked the hard tyre, but it was odd. It was a little bit odd. The call to pit was fine, like third.
They weren't
and
losing
fifth.
out anything, yeah.
Yeah, so Russell lost the place to Piastri, but on new tyres he backed them to overtake him, and yeah, it was a good thing, good call to make. But putting him on hards, Russell had mediums, didn't he? So I wonder if Hamilton just preferred that hard, or if maybe they were trying to screw him over. But obviously, get your tinfoil hat out, and yeah, it was strange to put him on hards. But safety car restarts, and again you had this good little battle between the McLarens running second and third now, and the Mercedes running fourth and fifth, and that was kind of the thing to watch for the last 15 laps or so, wasn't it?
Or was it Yuki Tsunoda?
Well, yeah, he was what, 7th, was he?
I was more referencing the mistake, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was running 7th, wasn't he? And yeah, a little bit of an error, quite a big error, just going onto the grass at the... What chicane is that? The 4th or some 3rd or 4th chicane, I guess.
3rd, technically, yeah.
And yeah, on the grass, which is still sodden, he had absolutely no grip. He was just sliding and almost had a really, really bad crash with Hulkenberg, but Hulkenberg's reactions came in massively clutch.
Well, I think the problem for Yuki in this one was, of course, this chicane confused me all weekend. Because if it was a tarmac runoff, I completely get why you're trying to force the drivers over to where they were forcing them. But yeah, on grass, and wet grass at that, you saw Yuki obviously when he went in, immediately tried to turn to make sure he'd go around that bollard to not pick up a penalty. But of course he was never going to get anywhere near it.
I don't think he was trying to get around the bollard.
Could you not see, as soon as he went off, he flicked it that way?
Well, he flicked it left, but that was because his
No,
rears
but he was square. In no world, if you're in that situation in a Formula 1 car, you're just going to flick the steering wheel either way if you're just looking to get back on the road. You hold on for dear life and point it straight.
Let us know what you think. I think he just lost his grip on the rears, so I had to try and correct it, and then that was the problem. But yeah, it cost him a points finish for sure. And Hulkenberg also almost had a nose collision, and in his interview afterwards he called it Code Brown, which is absolutely fair.
It's completely fair in that way, because Formula 1 cars don't do well in head-on collisions, do they? They are not really designed to crash head-on with each other. But yeah, I mean, obviously we had a little bit of a battle, didn't we, right towards the very end. Oscar and George made a little bit of contact, but that was kind of more of a nothing incident. Poor from George
in my mind.
Yeah, I think so.
You could make the argument
but you'd make the argument I'm the car ahead, so it's my corner.
Yeah, but you've got to leave space for, especially on the inside, you've got to leave space.
That's
for the car
not how it works, though, is it, in Formula 1 anymore?
It generally is with the cars on the inside. If you're trying to go around the outside, you've got to leave space.
Well, this is the problem with Formula 1, as we've both said countless times. Cars alongside, you give them room. That should be the rule.
Yeah. Which, I mean, Russell did just give them room, but he had to go off the track himself and lost position to both Piastri and Hamilton.
Yeah, and then
and the only good overtake he managed all race without making a mess of it was on his teammate.
Yeah, and Mercedes, of course, it was first podium of the year, so they were just praying that they didn't crash into each other.
Yeah, by this point, Piastri had dropped back behind because he can't manage his tyres to save his life still.
I think that's harsh, but yeah. But yeah, say Russell will then re-get Lewis, and Lewis reckoned after the race it was one of the worst races he'd ever driven. So he's clearly the opposite of Fernando Alonso, because I'm sure Alonso felt it was probably the best race he's ever driven.
Probably was. He beat his teammates, so it's right up there.
Wow, Lance Stroll. But yeah, it would be Max taking the win, though, ahead of Lando Norris. So once again, Lando with a P2, which actually promotes him down to P2 in the championship, doesn't it? Ahead of Russell, Lewis, Oscar, Fernando Alonso, Lance Stroll, Ricciardo, Gasly, and Ocon there. And you kind of think, 7 of those top 10 as you expect, and then you think, well, both Ferraris retired and Sergio Perez, so hence why, Ricciardo, I think, actually quietly did a very, very good job in the race as well in the end, kept out of trouble.
He did.
And beat out the Alpines. He did, weirdly. I couldn't even see it when I watched the replays.
He didn't jump the lights as per se, but he did basically let the car roll forward before the lights, so he was out of his grid spot when the lights went off.
Okay. Is that why it was a full start rather than a jump start?
That was why it's a full start, yeah.
Right.
So you couldn't get through a race weekend with Gasly and Albon as teammates without a little bit of controversy.
Sorry?
Gasly and Ocon.
I was going to say, this is news to me.
No controversy between those two. They're just both crying about Verstappen still. Gasly and Ocon, they used a bit of team orders to give Gasly 9th, which was, I don't know, here or there, wasn't it? I mean, you've got one driver staying with you next year and one not, so they might as well swap them over and pay for the driver they're keeping.
Yep.
And Esteban Ocon made a fuss about it.
At Monaco.
Exactly. And Gasly qualified ahead, so...
Ocon just continues to remind teams why you shouldn't hire him, I think.
And he also... it was painful watching his interview in the F1 post-race interview bit. He was like... I always follow instructions the team gives me. I'm too nice. I should have. And he was basically saying I should have stayed ahead because Gasly was never going to pass Ricciardo, so they were only battling themselves. But yeah, and sadly, both Hasses after this early gamble ended up P11, P12, but Hulk did beat Magnussen, so there you go.
Whoa. Did he in the end? I thought Magnussen overtook him.
Well, let me double check that. I'm pretty sure.
I don't think he did. I think Magnussen overtook him, didn't he, right towards the end, when he avoided Tsunoda?
No, Hulk 11th. There you go.
Okay. So despite Haas being the talk of the town at the start of the race, still got nothing for it.
When there were only 15 finishers, and one of them had a minute pit stop again.
Oh yeah, don't get me started on Sauber. Don't get me started on Sauber, man. It's just so stupid, isn't it? What are they doing that means that they can't seem to put tyres on a Formula 1
What
car?
they should do is they should go down to the fan zone and borrow the pit stop practice thing from that the fans can do, because genuinely those
guys... It'd be a better job than they're doing at the moment.
Exactly. Just pick up some random F1 fans and they'll do it in about 5 or 6 seconds.
So stupid. We have rambled on a lot today. I mean, there was a lot to go through, isn't it? But we've done a very long show.
Let's rattle off the admin real quick.
Exactly. We've done quiz already. Driver of the day, Jamie183. Who are you saying?
Driver of the day, I will say Max Verstappen, because I think that wasn't the fastest car at any point, and he won the race.
I think that's a fair argument. I would say George Russell had he not bottled it, but he
3
did.
times.
So I'm actually going to say, because he finished best of the rest and had a very good qualifying, I'm going to say Daniel Ricciardo.
Oh, very nice. There you go. Bit of love for Ricciardo.
Exactly. It's not often this year we give different driver of the days, is it? In fact, it's the second time this year that we've given a different driver of the day. So, and again, I can already read the comments now of people saying that I just don't want to give it to Max. No, I would say he was probably second on my list. But I think, Ricciardo...
Matt also doesn't like him, so...
Well, Ricciardo, I think, was under a lot of pressure because, of course, how viral those Jacques Villeneuve calls went, and he absolutely silenced him, which was fantastic to see. Race rating, I don't know about you, but I think that was the best race of the year so far.
I think it was, yeah.
So
and our previous, I think, looking back, we're being quite generous.
We were generous on a couple of them early on, weren't we?
Because Miami is a 7.5 for both of us, which
Miami was a decent race as well, to be fair. Yeah.
But I feel... I can't put this any higher than, I feel like 8.5 is the absolute maximum I can put this.
I was going to say an 8.5. There's definitely a lot of room for a 9.
I'll go for 8.5.
Exactly. I think 8.5 is across the board.
It was good. It was a good race. It was enjoyable. And there was always stuff going on, and it was always generally for the key positions.
What it was a reminder as to why Montreal works so well as a Formula 1 track.
Indeed.
And last but not least then, Jamie, predictions.
Now, we were massively bigging up Ferrari for this race.
We were.
So, scores on the doors, I'm on 37, you're on 32.
Oh,
so
okay.
5 points in it.
5 in it.
You said Verstappen, incorrect, on pole.
Well, hang on a minute.
Was he on pole
Verstappen
position?
Would set the fastest time in qualifying. And technically he did that.
And he didn't set it first, so you're getting no points for that.
Damn it.
So... You then said a Verstappen race win. Well done.
I got that one right,
+2.
annoyingly.
You said Lando P2. Well done.
Thank you. 4 points.
And Charles Leclerc P3. Nowhere near.
That was a problem.
I said Leclerc P1. Sadly,
that's even funnier.
He must have read that and put another 1 before it, and it was P11.
Yeah.
So no points there. Obviously, Russell got that pole position. Max Verstappen race win. Thank you. Leclerc
so we both
P2.
Got 2 points
no
for
chance.
Max winning.
No chance on Leclerc P2, and I put Piastri P3, which looked like it might happen for a bit, and then didn't happen.
Did he?
So
when?
He was running third on lap 63 or so before he got overtaken by both Mercedes.
To be fair, that is exactly the kind of 2 points you would screw me over with. Just by scoring.
So you got 4 and I got 2.
So that means 39 to 36?
Yeah, it's closing up.
Look at that, eh? Look at that. And I still get to make the predictions heading into Barcelona. Fantastic.
Which, caveat, being at round 10 is horrible. Why is Barcelona round 10?
It's disgusting, isn't it? Barcelona should be first 6 rounds of the year or not on the calendar. It's real simple. Have we got anything else to add, though, Jamie? I think we've done everything, haven't we?
I think we've done everything.
As we just tick over the 1 hour on our microphones as well, so very impressed with that. Thank you all, as always, so much for listening. If you have enjoyed, please do make sure to leave a like, get yourself subscribed. And yeah, we will be back next week then to preview the Spanish Grand Prix. And we said we might need to do something else, didn't we, earlier on in the show, but I forgot what it was.
The 2026 cars.
Yes, that was it. So join us then.